Hi, these are the most interesting historical photos that I could find. Let's go! A classroom in Texas fell completely silent when children heard that President John Kennedy would never return home again. One shocked student in this photo later said the room felt frozen for several minutes. In 1946, Howard University students watched surgery from stacked rows like a living wall of future doctors. Freedman's Hospital trained many black physicians at a time when most American hospitals still shut them out. This strange 1920s motorcycle setup turned a full canoe into a sidecar for road travel. The Rudge Whitworth canoe sidecar could carry a 14-foot canoe without needing a trailer. Marilyn Monroe's ceremonial kick at Ebbets Field turned into an accidental headline. The ball flew straight into photographer Joel Landau's head in front of the crowd on May 12, 1957. In March 1920, this rough armored vehicle rolled through Berlin during a failed attempt to seize power. The Kapp Putsch collapsed in only a few days after a mass strike froze the city. In 1960, America's first Mercury astronauts sat in silver pressure suits before anyone knew if humans could truly work in orbit. These suits were adapted from high-altitude flight gear, not built from scratch for space. In 1979, thousands of disco records were collected at Comiskey Park for a stunt that quickly became a national story. The event drew so many people that the baseball game was stopped and later marked as a forfeit. In 1960, two communist leaders smiled for cameras during an official visit that was meant to show total unity. Behind scenes like this, Poland still had to balance Soviet pressure with its own fragile national control. People in Jerusalem crowded around a small radio to hear one of the most watched trials of the 20th century. Adolf Eichmann had been found in Argentina and brought to Israel after years living under a false name. Valley Parade turned from a promotion celebration into disaster in just minutes on May 11, 1985. The old wooden stand was gone in 270 seconds, and the tragedy led to major stadium safety changes in Britain. A Japanese Zero sits broken on Munda in 1943, almost untouched by time under the bright island sun. The Zero was once feared for its speed and range, but by this stage, Allied forces were already turning captured wrecks into intelligence. This Soviet VMT carried a giant space rocket tank on top, making the plane look almost impossible to fly. It was a modified bomber built to move huge parts for the Energia and Buran space programs. Inside Riga's VEF factory, workers began the day surrounded by tiny electrical parts and strict Soviet production lines. VEF made radios, telephones, and electronics that reached homes across the Soviet Union. Leonid Brezhnev lit Moscow's eternal flame in 1967, turning a quiet memorial into one of the Soviet Union's most watched symbols. The flame was placed at the tomb of the unknown soldier near the Kremlin Wall. At Kabatuan Airfield in 1945, Japanese soldiers placed their equipment into a growing pile under Allied supervision. This surrender in the Philippines happened one day after the formal surrender ceremony in Tokyo Bay. Two farmers worked beneath the giant Bamiyan Buddha as if it had always been part of the valley. The statue stood about 55 meters tall for more than 1,400 years before it was destroyed in 2001. In 1976, a truck accident in Houston released a massive ammonia cloud that swallowed the road within moments. The cloud spread across a busy freeway area, turning an ordinary morning into one of the city's most alarming chemical emergencies. Churchill and Stalin smiled together in 1945, even as the post-war alliance was already cracking behind closed doors. That same year, British planners drafted Operation Unthinkable, a secret study for a possible conflict with the Soviet Union. A 1953 test flash rose beyond Indian Springs Air Force Base, while ordinary aircraft sat in the foreground. Encore had a yield of 27 kilotons, making the distant cloud stronger than the bomb used over Hiroshima. This Avenger kept flying after another damaged plane fell onto it near Chichijima in March 1945. The impact tore off part of the wing and cracked the fuselage near the tail, yet the aircraft still stayed in the air. In May 1969, Hill 937 became one of the most brutal climbs of the Vietnam War. After 10 days of fighting, United States forces took the hill, then soon abandoned it. Martin Luther King Jr. reached from a parade car as people pressed forward just to touch his hand. 1 year later, he became the youngest Nobel Peace Prize winner at that time. In 1998, this device was prepared before India's secret Pokhran tests in the Rajasthan desert. The tests made India a declared nuclear power and triggered sanctions from several countries. In 1937, Nikolai Yezhov kissed Mikhail Kalinin after receiving one of the Soviet Union's highest awards. Less than 3 years later, Yezhov himself was erased from power and removed from official history. Over the Salton Sea in 1982, a small Skyhawk trained against a much larger Tomcat in a high-speed mock fight. The A-4 was often used as an aggressor jet because its size and agility made it difficult to track. A hidden sniper at Gallipoli was reportedly covered in branches so well that he looked like part of the scrub. The disguise shows how close and strange battlefield camouflage could become in 1916. Lawrence Livermore built this 1979 vault door to protect one of America's most sensitive research sites. It was 8 feet thick, 12 feet wide, and weighed about 97,000 pounds, more than a loaded semi-truck. Ground crews on Guam loaded this B-29 before a long mission to Tokyo on April 13, 1945. The superfortress could fly from the Mariana Islands to Japan and carry one of the heaviest bomber loads of the war. Manhattan in 1931 still looked like a giant street grid before skyscrapers fully took over the skyline. Central Park already cut through the island like a huge empty rectangle, stretching over 800 acres in the middle of New York City. In 1961, American families toured backyard fallout shelters as fear of nuclear war spread across the country. Many shelters were little more than reinforced concrete boxes designed to keep people alive for a few weeks after radioactive fallout. During World War I, sheep grazed on the White House lawn to save labor and show wartime thrift. Their wool was later auctioned for the Red Cross, raising $52,823. Kaiser Wilhelm II appears relaxed here in 1913, just 1 year before Europe fell into World War. He was Queen Victoria's grandson, Germany's last emperor, and the ruler who pushed a huge navy that alarmed Britain. In 1944, Sergeant Olin Dowes used fluent German to call hidden soldiers out of a field in France. His words worked like a weapon, bringing them in with raised hands during an active American advance. In 1971, Seoul, police inspected men's hair in public as part of strict social control rules. Anyone judged too long could have it cut on the spot, turning personal style into a street-level offense. In April 1942, B-25B Mitchell bombers sat on USS Hornet for a mission no one had tried before. These land-based bombers were launched from an aircraft carrier during the Doolittle raid, proving Japan could be reached by air. St. Pancras Station was torn apart after a German air raid struck London on May 10, 1941. A 1,000-pound bomb crashed through the platforms and damaged the underground railway beneath the station. On May 9, 1945, soldiers of the U.S. 77th Infantry Division on Okinawa listened to radio reports announcing Germany's surrender. The broadcast marked the end of the war in Europe while the Pacific Campaign continued. On November 20, 1969, Apollo 12 astronauts landed about 200 meters from Surveyor 3 on the Moon. They collected parts of the unmanned spacecraft to bring back to Earth for study. In 1973, travelers at Chicago's Greyhound station used TV screens while waiting for Thanksgiving buses. The screens were an early attempt to entertain passengers before long journeys. In 1945, P-51 Mustang fighters escorted a B-29 Superfortress over enemy territory. Their presence greatly reduced the risk of attack from enemy aircraft on long bombing missions. During the Prague Uprising from May 5 to 9, 1945, Czech insurgents built barricades to block retreating German forces. Despite coordinating with the Russian Liberation Army, the city still suffered intense street fighting and heavy civilian casualties. RAF ground crews prepare a Handley Page Halifax Mark II for a mission during the World War II. The Mark II had stronger engines and improved guns, making it a key bomber for RAF operations over Europe. On May 10, 1946, a captured German V-2 rocket successfully launched from White Sands, reaching 112.6 kilometers. This flight followed two earlier failed attempts and marked the start of U.S. rocket testing post-World War II. On May 11, 1943, U.S. soldiers of the 17th Infantry landed on Attu to reclaim it from Japanese forces. The battle lasted until May 30th in harsh Arctic conditions, ending with nearly all Japanese defenders killed during a final banzai charge. In World War II, ground crews carried 108-gallon drop tanks to P-47 Thunderbolts. Made mostly of paper, the tanks conserved metal while extending the fighters' range for missions. In the 1960s, Yuri Gagarin and Valentina Tereshkova became the first man and woman in space. Both are pictured in their cosmonaut uniforms, proudly displaying medals from their historic achievements. In May 1945, U.S. soldiers in Trier celebrated Germany's surrender by draping a mannequin with a Nazi flag. The gesture symbolized the Allied victory in Europe at the end of World War II. On May 12, 1949, the Soviet blockade of Berlin ended, marking a major victory for the Allied airlift. U.S. and British crews celebrated as planes had kept the city supplied for nearly a year. When Elvis Presley was drafted into the U.S. Army in 1958, he refused a cushy assignment in special services and served as a regular soldier in Germany. By 1960, he had earned the rank of sergeant, and this photo shows his father Vernon inspecting his service medals outside Graceland. In 1966, a child from Oymyakon, Siberia, is bundled in a full fur suit to survive one of the coldest inhabited places on Earth. Temperatures in the village regularly drop below -50 degrees Celsius, making heavy furs essential for daily life. In the 1900 Galveston hurricane, floodwaters lifted entire houses off their foundations. This photo shows one home tilted on Avenue N, with children standing among debris, highlighting the storm's devastating force. In 1931, Joe Raggio, one of the heaviest men in the world at the time, is pictured sharing a meal with a young child. His extraordinary size made him a subject of fascination and public curiosity during the early 20th century. On October 12, 1944, German forces destroyed the railway tracks at Topčider Station in Belgrade. The sabotage aimed to disrupt Allied supply lines during the liberation of the city in World War II. This image captures the massive explosion that destroyed the Casablanca building in Madrid on March 19, 1938. Around 300 nationalist troops were killed when the five-story building was deliberately demolished during the Spanish Civil War. Women in chains stand in front of a wooden gate in Zanzibar, 1865, moments before being sold in the last decades of the local slave trade. Each chain around their necks could weigh over 5 kilograms, making every step a constant struggle. Workers climb a 320-foot rope ladder on the Oregon Trunk Bridge over Crooked River, 1905 to 1910. At this height, a single misstep could have been fatal, yet construction pushed forward to connect remote rail lines. Defendants sit numbered in the main dock during the Neuengamme concentration camp trial, 1946. These men faced justice for running one of the deadliest forced labor systems in Nazi Germany. Helsinki burns after a massive Soviet bombing on November 30, 1939. The attack destroyed entire streets in minutes, leaving cars and buildings engulfed in flames. German prisoners are forced to stand in narrow cylindrical cells at a French camp in 1945, each barely wide enough to move. These enclosures were designed to prevent sleep or rest, turning hours into relentless psychological torture. Residents of Londonderry hand tea and biscuits to an IRA fighter in 1972, showing civilian support amid violent conflict. Such gestures occurred during intense street battles, risking lives for brief moments of solidarity. Guards watch over a U.S. nuclear power plant in the Cold War era as fallout drills shaped public fear. Citizens were instructed to survive atomic blasts with plastic sheeting, duct tape, and canned food, highlighting the era's tense paranoia. German prisoners sit against a stone wall in Saint-Lô, France, July 1944, under armed U.S. guards. Tension lingers from recent combat, where young soldiers on both sides faced deadly firefights and heavy casualties. Isaac Sprague, born a healthy child, began losing weight rapidly at age 12, eventually becoming one of the thinnest men recorded. He performed in circuses as the Amazing Thin Man, astonishing audiences with his almost skeletal frame. On May 7, 1931, Auguste Piccard and P. Kipfer prepared their stratospheric balloon in Belgium, aiming for the edge of the atmosphere. They reached a record 15,781 meters, becoming the first humans to enter the stratosphere and study it directly. In 1960, Tokyo, thousands of students from the radical Zengakuren group clashed with police during mass protests. They demanded the closure of American military bases, turning the streets into chaotic, high-tension battlegrounds. The cargo ship Pyotr Vasev shows severe bow damage after colliding with the passenger liner Admiral Nakimov near Novorossiysk on August 31, 1986. The disaster killed 423 people, making it one of the deadliest maritime accidents in Soviet history. Herero men are chained in a German concentration camp in Southwest Africa, 1904 to 1908. Starvation, dehydration, and forced labor killed between 50,000 and 90,000 people in one of the first genocides of the 20th century. On June 24, 1939, Robert Wadlow, the world's tallest man at 8 feet 8.5 inches and 491 pounds, appeared at the RS department store in Roaring Spring, Pennsylvania. His extraordinary height, caused by a pituitary disorder. Over 200 Chinese prisoners in Shanghai, 1926, await execution after being held for more than a year. Authorities plan to kill 5 to 10 men weekly from each foreign concession, creating a slow, systematic wave of executions. A discarded radiological device in Brazil, 1987, caused the deaths of 4 people who opened it in a graveyard. Handling the device spread radioactive contamination to 249 others, marking the worst nuclear accident outside of a power plant. Millie and Christine McCoy, conjoined twins born into slavery in North Carolina in 1851, stand proudly after emancipation. They gained independence, wealth, and influence, using their earnings to support their family, fund schools, and donate to historically black colleges. The cockpit of a DH-110 Sea Vixen fighter crashes toward spectators at the Farnborough Air Show, England, September 6, 1952. The stunt went tragically wrong, killing both pilots, 29 spectators, and leaving 69 more with severe injuries. 14-year-old Megumi Yokota was abducted by North Korean agents in 1978 and forced to train spies. Despite North Korea's claim that she died, evidence suggests her fate remains uncertain. An American F-105 warplane is shot down over North Vietnam in September 1966, and the pilot ejects, his parachute deploying. The image, captured by photographer Mai Nam near Vinh Phuc, shows the chaos and danger of aerial combat north of Hanoi. An ascetic in the late 1800s wears a metal grid welded around his neck, preventing him from lying down. This extreme self-discipline reflects centuries-old practices of physical endurance and spiritual devotion. In 1957, the 101st Airborne pushed back a violent mob of segregationists in Little Rock, Arkansas, using bayonets to protect 9 black students integrating Central High School. This action enforced federal desegregation orders amid intense local resistance. In 1988, a mounted NYPD officer arrests a suspect during a street robbery in New York City. The dramatic capture, photographed by Don Hallisey, highlights the tense, hands-on nature of urban policing. Police display captured weapons and robes from the Black Legion, a radical splinter group of the Ku Klux Klan. Unlike the Klan, they embraced extreme violence and intimidation, targeting anyone they considered a political or social threat. Oceanographer Stanislav Kurilov, barred from travel in the USSR, made a daring escape by jumping from a ship into the ocean. He swam nearly 100 kilometers over 2 days and 3 nights to reach the Philippines, surviving against incredible odds. Carrie Nation, 1901, famously wielded a small hatchet to destroy saloons and bars, believing alcohol caused most social problems. She smashed tables, doors, and bottles, and was arrested repeatedly for property destruction and disturbing the peace. A student demonstrates skill and courage in an archery class at Ohio State University, 1936. Standing mere feet from the instructor, she aims her bow with precision, showcasing early women's participation in competitive sports. Mothers and children are confined in the Kula Tower of the Stara Gradiška concentration camp. The cramped, dark conditions reveal the brutal treatment of families in one of the most notorious camps of World War II. Union soldier William Johnson, 23, waits on the gallows in Virginia, 1864, after being convicted of attempting to rape a Confederate soldier's wife during the siege of Petersburg. During the American Civil War, roughly 500 soldiers were executed by both sides, mostly for desertion. An 800mm artillery shell next to a person designed for the massive German heavy Gustav railway gun. This enormous projectile could weigh over 7 tons and destroy fortifications hundreds of meters away during World War II. During the June 28, 1998, Hell in a Cell match, Mankind fell unscripted through the 16-foot-high roof into the ring. The Undertaker stands above as medical staff rush to check on him, capturing one of the most infamous and dangerous moments in professional wrestling history. A Lakota man decorates his horse with symbolic paint for a ceremonial event in Alberta, Canada, 1930. Each mark and pattern held spiritual meaning, connecting the rider and horse to tradition and community rituals. Lemmy Kilmister, 1984, sits restrained in a steam-filled hot seat during a dramatic photo shoot. Captured by Finn Costello, the image highlights the rock icon's intense persona and rebellious image. This 1938 Italian fascist poster urges citizens to believe, obey, fight, promoting absolute loyalty to Mussolini's regime. It reflects the era's propaganda, glorifying militarism and authoritarian control through bold imagery and slogans. Residents of former Italian Mogadishu read the announcement of Italian Somaliland's surrender to Allied forces on April 11, 1941. The proclamation marked the end of Italian control and a major shift in East Africa during World War II. Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi poses with a falcon, a symbol of power and prestige in Arab culture. Falcons were often used by Gaddafi to project authority and connect with traditional Bedouin values. Women carry offerings during a ceremony at Besaki Temple, Bali, Indonesia, 1977. The ritual reflects the island's deep Hindu traditions, where daily offerings maintain spiritual balance and honor the gods. In June 1986, Sri Lankan actor Vijaya Kumaratunga visits India to meet former Tamil Nadu Chief Minister M.G. Ramachandran. The meeting highlights cultural and political exchanges between Sri Lankan and Indian leaders during the 1980-an. An Afghan Mujahideen fighter proudly holds a peanut butter ration sent by the U.S. during the Soviet-Afghan War, 1987. Such supplies were part of extensive foreign aid that supported resistance fighters against Soviet forces. A Roman water boiler from the 1st century BCE, found at Villa della Pisanella in Boscoreale, Italy. It is exceptionally rare, surviving with its complete network of pipes and fittings intact, showing advanced engineering for the period. Tobacco farmers in Durham, North Carolina, 1939, wait for their crops to be sold at auction, sometimes overnight or for several days. Many pass the time in cafes or pool rooms, resting wherever they can while enduring the long, uncertain hours. A child pets a dog while overlooking the terraced valleys of Ladinia, northern Italy, 1960s. The isolated Ladine communities preserved their Reato Romance language and identity through centuries of outside pressures, including Italianization under fascism. A German soldier rests briefly during the Battle of Stalingrad, 1942 to 1943. The brutal urban combat and extreme winter conditions made it one of the deadliest confrontations of World War II. A sculpted bust lies among the ruins of a cathedral 2 miles from the atomic bomb detonation site in Nagasaki, 1945. The destruction captures the immense power of the blast, which leveled buildings and claimed tens of thousands of lives. This 1964 photo shows the final view of Vincent van Gogh's 1877 apartment before demolition. The building where Van Gogh lived during his early artistic development stood as a silent witness to the beginnings of his creative journey. Reza Shah and Crown Prince Mohammad Reza walk as dark silhouettes through an Iranian village farm in the 1930s. One would be forced from power in 1941, while the other would rule until the 1979 revolution. New Guinean soldiers escort a captured Japanese prisoner from a jungle hut on Bougainville, March 23, 1945. Their local tracking skills were crucial in terrain where hidden paths and dense forest could decide who survived. Princess Marguerite, a French sideshow performer with dwarfism, proudly poses with her husband and children during the 1930s. At just 38 inches tall and 40 pounds, she became famous not for her condition alone, but for traveling the country while raising a healthy family. A Palestinian woman harvests grapes in Ain Yabrud, 1937, wearing traditional embroidered dress in the vineyard. Grapes were a major village crop, turned into raisins, syrup, and family income across the hill towns. Fans rushed to smother a supporter during the Bradford City Stadium fire on May 11, 1985. The blaze spread through the wooden stand in minutes, killing 56 people and injuring more than 265. Theodore Roosevelt Jr. landed with the first wave at Utah Beach on D-Day, walking with a cane at age 56. He calmly redirected troops from the wrong landing spot, helping turn confusion into one of the most successful Normandy assaults. Fans scramble across the pitch as Valley Parade's main stand burns on May 11, 1985. The wooden structure was consumed in just 270 seconds, leaving 56 dead and more than 265 injured. A French soldier aims from a mud trench in the Argonne, 1915, wrapped against cold and shell fire. This forest front became a grinding maze of trenches, where meters of ground could cost thousands of lives. Marilyn Monroe poses barefoot in a Los Angeles park in 1951, still being promoted as a rising 20th Century Fox starlet. The relaxed photo was part of a publicity push before she became one of Hollywood's most photographed faces. Elite Soviet security troops pose in camouflage during operations against Ukrainian nationalist insurgents in the 1950s. Some units used local dialects, captured radios, and infiltration tactics to track underground networks after World War II. Albert Einstein visits the Hopi people near the Grand Canyon in 1931 and is honored with a feathered headdress. The ceremony recognized his pacifist beliefs. Years before war and exile made him one of the most watched scientists in the world. Japanese soldiers carry a Type 92 heavy machine gun to a disarmament area at Cabatuan Airfield in Iloilo after surrender. The same landing strip later became part of the runway system for today's Iloilo International Airport. Grace Kelly shakes hands with Prince Rainier III of Monaco during their first meeting on May 6, 1955, at the Palais Princier. The encounter was arranged during the Cannes Film Festival, and less than a year later, the Hollywood actress would become Princess of Monaco. The airship Norge leaves Ny-Ålesund on May 11, 1926, heading into the Arctic sky toward the North Pole. Led by Amundsen, Ellsworth, and Nobile, it became the first verified aircraft to cross the pole. Alice Roosevelt Longworth stands with her 15-month-old daughter Paulina at Circus Grounds on May 11, 1926. The daughter of Theodore Roosevelt was famous for sharp wit, political influence, and a rule-breaking public life. While we're looking at these photos, don't forget to write in the comments. Which historical shot did you like the most, and for what reason? Belgian soldiers shelter in a trench during the First Battle of Ypres, November 1914. This battle helped freeze the Western Front into years of trench warfare, where survival often meant mud, cold, and waiting. Meryl Streep plays Daisy May in her high school production of Lil Abner in Bernardsville, New Jersey, 1966. Years before winning Oscars, she was already performing on a small school stage. On May 11, 1960, Mossad agents found former Nazi official Adolf Eichmann hiding in Argentina under a false name. He was secretly flown to Israel disguised as airline crew, where his trial became one of the most watched cases of the century. In Santos, Brazil, 1966, the Brazilian football star posed beside his Mercedes during the years when he was already a global icon. By then, he had helped Brazil win the 1958 and 1962 World Cups, yet he was still only 25 years old. In 1941, British troops found this stone head of Benito Mussolini near a captured Italian ammunition dump at a former Italian-held fort. The broken monument turned a symbol of power into a strange battlefield trophy. On November 3, 1960, Kyoko Asanuma faced the press in Tokyo one day after the 17-year-old who attacked her husband died in custody. Her husband, socialist leader Inajiro Asanuma, had been struck during a live televised debate 3 weeks earlier. On May 12, 1937, George VI was crowned king after his brother Edward VIII gave up the throne less than 6 months earlier. George had never been raised to expect the crown, and his sudden reign would soon carry Britain through the Second World War. On August 11, 1998, Nelson Mandela met Yasser Arafat in Cape Town during a period of intense Middle East diplomacy. Mandela often linked South Africa's freedom story with Palestinian self-determination, making this handshake politically symbolic far beyond the room. In the early 1920s, Inajiro Asanuma was a Waseda University student, long before he became chairman of the Japan Socialist Party. Decades later, his name would be tied to one of Japan's most shocking televised political moments in 1960. In Aspen, Colorado, 1990, Margaret Thatcher and George Herbert Walker Bush spoke to reporters just as Iraq's move into Kuwait was turning into a major world crisis. Thatcher later became famous for urging Bush not to hesitate. In September 1963, 12-year-old Sarah Jean Collins lay in a Birmingham hospital after the attack on the 16th Street Baptist Church. Her sister, Addie Mae Collins, and 3 other girls were lost that day, making the church a lasting symbol of America's civil rights struggle. On May 9, 1986, a wedding party crossed the street in Polesko, near Chernobyl, only days after the nuclear accident. The calm scene feels unsettling because daily life was still continuing while invisible contamination was spreading through the region. In 1942, Japanese forces displayed a Douglas Boston III bomber rebuilt from aircraft parts left behind at Cilacap in Java. The plane was originally linked to Dutch forces, making this a rare look at captured Allied equipment being studied and reused during the war. In 1923, Albert Einstein gave his Nobel lecture in Gothenburg, Sweden, after receiving the 1921 Nobel Prize in Physics. The prize honored his work on the photoelectric effect, not his famous theory of relativity. Around 1900, this glass negative captured an older gentleman in a 3-piece suit during a formal studio portrait. The sharp pose, direct gaze, and small cigarette give the image an unusually modern feel for a photo made more than a century ago. On July 14, 1916, a 10-centimeter armored howitzer M5 stood at Côte 1313 on Mount Rombon in the Julian Alps. Soldiers placed heavy artillery on these high mountain positions, where thin air, steep climbs, and no easy supply routes made every movement difficult. On May 12, 1926, the airship Norge crossed the North Pole with Roald Amundsen, Umberto Nobile, and Lincoln Ellsworth on board. It became the first widely accepted expedition to reach the pole, and even Nobile's small dog Titina became part of the story. In 1898, trains, streetcars, wagons, and pedestrians all crowded the Brooklyn side of the Brooklyn Bridge. The bridge had opened only 15 years earlier, yet it already worked like a moving machine above New York streets. In Bangalore, Nobel Prize physicist Chandrasekhara Venkata Raman stood before a blackboard filled with diffraction diagrams and formulas. He became world famous for the Raman effect, a discovery that showed how light changes when it passes through matter. At an airfield in Guangzhou, a Japanese Navy-type Zero transport was photographed with Chinese markings after it changed hands. The Showa L-2D was Japan's version of the famous Douglas DC-3, turning this aircraft into a rare mix of Japanese production and Allied design. This 1942 KISS card was a cheap vending machine novelty where the sender could mark playful answers and leave a lipstick print. For just 1 cent, it turned a tiny paper card into a flirtatious message meant to be saved, mailed, or quietly passed to someone special. This portrait shows an Ainu woman from northern Japan wearing traditional mouth tattoos, a cultural practice once linked to identity, protection, and adulthood. The tattoos were built up slowly over many years, with soot from birch bark fires. In 1859, 20-year-old George Armstrong Custer posed in his West Point cadet uniform, 2 years before graduating last in a class of 34. He later became a Civil War cavalry commander, but in 1876, his confidence ended at the Battle of the Little Bighorn after scouts warned that his force was badly outnumbered. In the 1890s, Nadezhda Krupskaya was already part of Russia's underground revolutionary world before becoming Vladimir Lenin's wife. By 1930, her old status made her difficult for Stalin to ignore, and her sudden final illness in 1939 still left questions behind. In Chaplin, West Virginia, 1938, photographer Marion Post Wolcott captured a coal miner at home with 6 of his 7 children. The original caption noted that his wife often suffered from a serious bronchial condition. In Makhachkala in the 1980s, this Dagestani Korean wedding reflected the mixed lives created across the Soviet Union. Many Soviet Koreans, known as Koryo-Saram, had roots in the Russian Far East before their communities were moved to Central Asia in 1937. In London in 1944, 28-year-old Roald Dahl walked beside 45-year-old Ernest Hemingway before both became linked to world-famous books. Dahl was then a Royal Air Force veteran and intelligence officer, while Hemingway was reporting from wartime Europe. On May 12, 1926, the airship Norge crossed the North Pole during its flight from Spitsbergen toward Alaska. With Roald Amundsen, Umberto Nobile, Lincoln Ellsworth, and 27 people aboard, it became the first widely accepted expedition to reach the pole by air. On May 10, 1869, the Golden Spike Ceremony at Promontory Summit, Utah, joined the Union Pacific and Central Pacific Railroads. The new line connected the United States coast to coast by rail, cutting a journey that once took months to about a week. Around 1905, William F. Cody staged a bison hunting scene for the audience at his Wild West show. His traveling performances turned frontier life into mass entertainment and helped shape how millions imagined the American West. In Montana in 1908, 2 Apsaluk riders passed a teepee in a snow-covered forest. The scene preserves a winter moment from Crow life, where horses, shelter, and movement through harsh weather were part of daily survival. Apache defendants are photographed after a globe court case around 1888, just before being sent to Yuma Territorial Prison. The Apache Kid stands second from the right in the back row, still wearing his brass reservation tag on his coat. Wyatt Earp stands beside a custom 1926 Packard Opera Coupe in Los Angeles near the end of his life. The former Old West lawman had become friends with silent film stars, turning his frontier past into living Hollywood history. John Glenn rests aboard the United States Navy ship Noah after orbiting Earth on February 20, 1962. His Friendship 7 capsule was pulled from the Atlantic only 21 minutes after splashdown. Smoke rises over Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, as Japanese aircraft hit the United States Pacific Fleet. In less than 2 hours, the raid damaged or sank major ships and pushed the United States into World War II. Hoover Dam stands completed in 1936, with buses and workers looking tiny beneath its giant concrete wall. It held back the Colorado River to create Lake Mead, then the largest human-made reservoir in the world. The Valley of Tears shows the 1972 Andes crash site in January 1973, and the same silent slope in January 2025. 16 survivors endured 72 days in freezing mountains before rescue, turning this remote valley into one of history's most shocking survival stories. Australian soldiers work a 40mm Bofors anti-aircraft gun at Milne Bay, New Guinea in 1942, as a Royal Australian Air Force P-40 lands behind them. This muddy airstrip became the place where Japan suffered its first clear land defeat of the Pacific War. A woman reads calmly on Bournemouth Beach in 1944, surrounded by barbed wire and coastal defense barriers. Even popular British holiday beaches were fenced off during World War II, turning seaside rest into a scene of quiet tension. As Britain celebrated victory, these parents stood at the graves of their children lost in a wartime school air raid. For them, the end of World War II meant no flags or street parties, only an empty place at home. Berlin rubble women clear the broken city in 1945, sorting bricks by hand while daily life restarted among ruins. For every 1,000 cleaned bricks, they earned only 12 Reichsmarks, but the better ration card was often worth more than the money. Australian soldiers inspect an abandoned Japanese Ki 45 heavy fighter on Labuan Island in June 1945. The twin-engine aircraft was built to hunt bombers, but by this stage, Japan was losing airfields faster than it could defend them. Hungarian soldiers hide in a leaf-covered trench on the Eastern Front in 1942 with a 31M light machine gun set up for air defense. The heavy camouflage shows how troops tried to vanish from enemy aircraft in a battlefield, where being seen first could decide everything. A Hungarian motorcyclist pauses beside a Soviet BA-10M armored car in 1941 with another armored vehicle visible down the road. The BA-10M carried a 45mm cannon on a 6-wheeled chassis, making it dangerous on roads but vulnerable in mud and rough ground. This T-3485 was knocked out by the 76mm gun of a late-model Sherman tank during the Korean War in 1950. Using special high-velocity rounds, Sherman crews destroyed 41 enemy tanks that year. This German parachute mine fell in 1940 and stayed intact, turning an ordinary street into a silent danger zone. After specialists made it safe, the same device was used to train disposal teams and later preserved at the Imperial War Museum. In a forest near Poppenhausen on May 11, 1942, 20 Polish prisoners from Buchenwald were forced to stand before a staged public execution. The scene was arranged as a warning to forced laborers, and in 2014, a memorial plaque finally listed every victim by name. Colorado coal miners pose outside a rough stone and mud cabin, the kind of shelter built close to remote pits where work never truly ended. Many miners were paid through company systems and lived under the same owners who controlled their jobs, homes, and supplies. These portraits show the 10 Irish hunger strikers who lost their lives in 1981 during a prison protest in Northern Ireland. Their demand for political prisoner status turned small jail cells into an international crisis and reshaped Irish politics. A young British royal is seen giving a raised arm salute in a private family film from the 1930s. The footage became controversial decades later because it showed how casually dangerous political symbols could appear before the full horror of the era was understood. A wedding crowd dances in Jerusalem seconds before the floor suddenly gives way beneath them. The collapse dropped guests 2 stories, leaving 23 people lost and about 380 injured in one of Israel's worst celebration disasters. Air Florida Flight 90 sits at Washington National Airport on January 13, 1982, minutes before takeoff in heavy snow. The jet was not properly de-iced, stalled after leaving the runway, and fell into the Potomac River, with 78 lives lost. Lori Jean Dapies arrived at her boyfriend's apartment in Appleton, Wisconsin on August 19, 1992, but never made it from the parking lot to the door. Her locked car was found with a cup of soda still sitting on the roof. A Bosnian girl poses in 1896 with traditional hand and chest tattoos used by Balkan Christian communities under Ottoman rule. These marks acted as faith symbols and identity protection, especially when families feared conversion pressure or unwanted marriage. Men Run as a military observation balloon bursts into flames in Oklahoma, April 1918, during training for the First World War. Hydrogen made these balloons rise fast, but one spark could turn the whole giant envelope into fire in seconds. On June 4, 1988, a train carrying military cargo exploded near the railway station in Arzamas, sending a massive smoke cloud over the city. The disaster left 91 people lost, 744 hurt, and hundreds of families without homes, captured by amateur photographer Nikolai Bloshenkov. John Wallace, a wealthy Georgia landowner, speaks from jail in 1950 while waiting for his final appeal. He claimed it was an accident, but the case began over 2 missing cows and became a chilling symbol of landlord power in the rural South. In 1957, a passenger plane went down on Rikers Island, and dozens of inmates rushed through the snow to pull survivors from the wreckage. Their bravery was so unexpected that many later received pardons, shortened sentences, or public praise from New York officials. John Wesley, age 28, appears in a newspaper portrait printed as a final public record before his death sentence. The short caption turns one man's entire fate into a few cold lines, showing how punishment and publicity were tightly linked in that era. The Black Avengers were an armed Moscow group that spread fear during the chaos of 1917 to 1920. Their raids mostly targeted militia officers, showing how law and street power collided after the old order collapsed. An American medic from the 48th Medical Battalion treats an injured German soldier after combat in World War II. Even on opposite sides, battlefield medical rules often turned enemies into patients within minutes. On August 8, 1944, a fallen American P-47 Thunderbolt pilot was buried beside the wreckage of his aircraft. His grave was marked with the same machine gun rounds his plane had carried, turning the crash site into a raw battlefield memorial. After the Great Blizzard of 1888, telegraph poles lean across a New York City street like broken masts. The storm buried streets, cut communication lines, and pushed the city to move many wires underground. During the Winter War, a Finnish soldier carries a glass fuel bottle on his belt, 1939 to 1940. These simple weapons became famous because small ski troops used them against Soviet armored vehicles in freezing forests. Japanese soldiers inspect the shattered remains of an American B-29 Superfortress after a Tokyo raid in 1945. The curved Browning M2 gun in front shows how even one of the most advanced bombers of the war could end as twisted metal on the ground. Young Francesco Lentini poses calmly in 1903, already advertised on postcards as the three-legged boy. Born in Sicily with an extra leg from an incomplete twin, he later became a famous American performer known for sharp humor and balance tricks. The 1931 Hawke's Bay earthquake shattered Napier's streets while crews fought fires among collapsed shops. It took 256 lives and led to an Art Deco rebuild that still defines the city today. A crowd surrounds an 18-foot shark caught at Port Chalmers, New Zealand, around 1900. Its size turned a working harbor into a street spectacle, showing how rare sea giants could stop daily life. Christopher Evans's artificial arm from 1894 shows how an Old West fugitive turned injury into legend. After losing his real arm in a shootout, he was remembered by some as a criminal and by others as a poor man's Robin Hood. A Mitsubishi, a 6M50 from Yukio Seki's group, dives toward the escort carrier USS Kitkunbei in Leyte Gulf on October 25, 1944. The attack came during Japan's first large organized kamikaze wave, when small escort carriers suddenly became frontline targets. On February 9, 1996, the London Docklands attack ended an 18-month IRA ceasefire and tore through the financial district. 2 people lost their lives, more than 100 were hurt, and the damage signaled a shocking return to conflict after hopes of peace. Operation Snowball set off 500 tons of TNT in Alberta, Canada on July 17, 1964, creating a fireball-like wall of force in the open plains. The test was designed to copy the pressure of a nuclear blast without using a nuclear device, letting scientists study shockwaves safely. I will be very grateful for your subscription to the channel. Every day I try to tell you about such interesting historical photos.